yeah, that's when DPDR like kind of set off in that moment, like feeling like something is weird about my reality or my sight, or when you're in that state, like you do not believe that like it's happening to you, and it feels so strong and feels like so real that you really think like, okay, I'm gonna lose my mind, or whatever that might mean, I'm gonna like not exist, or I'm not gonna like get better. I can assure you guys, you are not crazy. You are not like stuck in this forever. This is something that your anxiety does to your brain, and like in this moment it feels so like debilitating, and but it is not. Is your anxiety, you'll learn how to deal with this. You're going to be able to work with anxiety instead of like being so fearful. But once you feel truly good, like you can conquer everything else that comes afterwards.
Hey everyone, I'm Sean O'Connor, author of the Depersonalization Manual, and today I'm speaking with Natalia, based in Germany. Natalia is 21 years old. In October of 2024, she developed Depersonalization Disorder, triggered by an intense panic attack. Over the following months, she struggled with chronic anxiety surrounding mental and physical health, fear of schizophrenia, and extreme intrusive thoughts about existential topics that made her unable to work for almost the whole month of December. She also suffered from insomnia and developed a phobia of all metaphysical and religious topics. It was a debilitating experience. But thankfully, Natalia has since made a full recovery. As she wrote to me in a recent email, quote, "I'm happy to say that I've completely recovered from it now 4 months later. I'm very passionate about sharing my knowledge and experience to everybody suffering. I would love to do an interview so I can help spread the message that it is indeed possible to recover, because I really thought that it wasn't, and it really helped me to see all the stories of people who fully recovered," end quote. And Natalia is with us today to talk about her experience with and recovery from Derealization Disorder. Natalia, you're very welcome to the channel. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sean. Nice to meet you.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. Natalia, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, so as Sean mentioned, I'm 21 years old. I live in Germany. I just finished cosmetology school actually, so I'm a new cosmetologist. I'm I'm doing facials, I'm doing everything from head to toe. Yeah, so that's sort of the thing that I do. I am working on my own little business right now, so that's fun, and a lot of changes this year. So yeah, that's
That's
what's going
great.
on right now. Yeah.
What does the business involve? Is it your own products or applications or what?
Yeah, applications, I would say. I am currently working at like a beauty salon, and I'm working on having my own little room where I do my own facials and stuff, by myself. So yeah, that's sort of like the business that I'm trying to go into.
That's
Mhm.
fantastic. And you're from Poland originally, Natalia, is that correct?
Yep, I am. Yes.
Okay, okay. And how has life been in Germany?
Honestly, I only know life in Germany, so I can't really compare it to like Poland. I've been there only for like 6 years of my life. So yeah, life has been great, and I would say like Germany has a lot of advantages when it comes to like the industry and stuff, and like just everything, like financial advantages like to Poland. Also like political, but that's a whole different story, I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, certainly, certainly. Um, Natalia, can you tell us a bit about your experience with DPDR and how did it start for you?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I would say the starting point of it was around October 2024, like the beginning of it. That was when my mom sort of had like health issues. She had to go from one hospital to another, and like nobody really knew what was going on with her. And since I'm very close with my mom, that kind of like really made an impact on me. I was the one calling the ambulance for her. I was the one kind of going to the visits with her. So for me, that really like kind of set off that little inkling of health anxiety, I would say, because nobody knew what it was. And it ended up not being anything crazy, of course, but in these moments, I would say like you really catastrophize. So, leading on to that, I kind of developed like sort of like a fear of uh physical health problems, like I was experiencing at that time like little yeah, like little symptoms, like for example, like my head got dizzy or my vision got a little blurry or I was having like a heart racing, and like at this point I didn't like associate that with like panic attacks. But now looking back at it, like I know that was probably like anxiety building up because there was so much going on in my life. And yeah, I originally thought it's gonna like it is a brain tumor. Like I really got so fixated on the thought that that's gonna be brain tumor, like it has to be. And that's where it all started. Like I started researching, I started like on every social media, I started like having all types of research marathons like about brain tumors, about brain disease, and it led me up to the point where I actually got a brain scan, and of course nothing was wrong, but I can pinpoint like an exact moment where I had a really bad like panic attack about it. Like I was just so sick and tired of it. That was after like a neurologist appointment. And I remember on that day, like I had a long day at work and I was walking home with my husband. And I sort of live on the outskirts of Germany, um, where like there's a lot of like straight paths that are like really just trees, for example. And so I remember walking and I kind of like felt like I I was not moving forward. If that's if you understand what I mean, Sean, like I was felt like I was just walking, 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 and I wasn't like moving forward because like the path was so like same. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if it makes sense. And I got really scared of that feeling. Like I got super scared and I felt like, oh my gosh, what's going on? And yeah, that's when DPDR like kind of set off in that moment, like feeling like something is weird about my yeah, about my reality or my sight or yeah.
And is that the moment that the panic attack happened? And Natalia was when you were out walking in that path.
Yeah, that was the main part of the panic attack, and then I eventually got it home, of course, and that's when the panic attack sort of like progressed. Like I kind of looked at my husband, my mom, and I was like, oh my gosh, like what is this feeling? I feel so strange. I feel like you guys are not real. Like I really got like the 100% of the DPDR like right there in this moment. I got really scared of it. And yeah, and then I kind of managed to calm down. But and I thought like, okay, that was just like a one off like feeling, I'm gonna go to sleep and I'm gonna feel better. But sadly that was not the case. I woke up and the feeling was still there and I was still super anxious. Like I was having all the physical symptoms of anxiety, my heart was racing, my body was shaking, I was super tense and stuff. And of course the DPDR feeling was still there.
Yeah. Isn't it so interesting how something as harmless as like walking on a long path,
Yeah.
and if you're so from a non-anxious perspective,
Mhm.
that experience is like you're walking a long path and you think to yourself, God, this is kind of a boring path. This is quite
Absolutely.
right.
Yeah.
This is just quite long, and she says they could use a bit of variation here. But when
Yeah.
you're in an anxious but when you're in an anxious place, that same experience feels like, oh my God, is something wrong? Why isn't this changing? Am I in a dream?
Mhm.
Why can't I wake up? And then you start panicking and panicking.
Yeah.
But you know, uh, and it seems like, so from what you're describing, Natalia, that, you know, it was that buildup of different stresses over time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then at some point your brain just kind of, your brain's in such high alert, but there's no danger around. So then you're literally walking down a path with trees, and your brain starts to see danger in it, right?
Mhm.
And then you think, oh, something is terribly wrong. And what's really interesting about it, I mean, the scariest thing about a panic attack is that it appears to be happening for no reason, right?
Mhm.
So if you were being chased by a bear down that path, God
Mhm.
forbid, but if that if that was happening,
Yeah.
when you when you got home to your to your family,
Mhm.
you probably wouldn't have given it a second thought. I mean, it would have been scary, and also
Yeah.
let's catch the bear, like, but you wouldn't have you wouldn't have worried that what you experienced was a problem because there was a
Yeah.
reason for it. But
Mhm.
take the bear out of it, and you're just walking on a path, and you have those exact same feelings as if you're going to die, you're going to go crazy or whatever.
Mhm.
And then you start to think, oh my goodness, where did this come from? What's wrong with me? And then you become really afraid of it, and you start monitoring for it.
Yeah.
Um, I had the same thing, Natalia, where I went to the first day it happened to me, nice that it happened to me. I went to bed thinking to myself, like, I'll sleep this off. I have to sleep this off. And when I woke up the next morning, the first thing I did was I checked to see was the feeling there.
Yeah.
And and of course it was. And then I started focusing on it again and again. And off it went on that spiral. So what were the next couple of days like for you then, Natalia?
Honestly, it's sort of like a blur to me. Like it's super hard to explain like the timeline of things because even before this like experience that I had with the big panic attack, of course, like leading up to that moment, I also had like feelings of anxiety, but I would say this was the main like event that happened that really set it off for me. And I kind of managed to go out of the DPDR like for after a week of this panic attack. Like I kind of managed to like really just focus on not looking at these things and not looking at like symptoms or whatever. And I think that's so funny. Like our brain kind of jumps from one thing to another. Like for me, as I said, that was sort of the thought of having like a brain disease or like a brain tumor. But then I thought, oh, since I had the scan and nothing is wrong, then it has to be something else, right? Like still have these symptoms, so maybe it's schizophrenia. And then the next thing like started happening, you know, I was like reading into schizophrenia now. I was reading into all like a serious mental illness and that's when the DPDR started again. And I would say that that time around it got even worse to me. Um yeah, like it was even worse. Yeah, that's what happened the next days. Like I started researching about like schizophrenia and like I started reading about all sorts of like mental illness things, you know, because I also um I also like kind of realized, okay, if this is nothing like physical, it has to be something mental. And my brain jumped into something like really like um terrible or horrible or the worst case scenario, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, isn't it interesting how DP and DR and anxiety in general, it requires you to focus on it. Like it requires
Mhm.
your attention in order to exist. So even when you don't fully understand what's happening towards the start, when you take your attention and you focus away from it long enough, that can reduce the symptoms. Okay. And
Mhm.
this is one of the, as you know, the this is one of the core kind of techniques that's used in recovery is continually refocusing your attention away from the symptoms, which gives your brain the space to process them and let them go in the background. But even after that first week, when you just were maybe busy or focusing away from them,
Mhm.
that reduced the symptoms just a little bit. But then refocusing back on them causes them
Yeah.
to ramp up again. Um, and so were you speaking to your family? Were you speaking to your husband about this when it was happening? Were
Yeah.
you able
I
to articulate it?
Yes, honestly, like I right away I started to seek help because I really felt like short, I never like struggled with anxiety before, so to me it was a very foreign feeling, like I was super frightened with this, like I didn't know what's going on. I just couldn't like put one and two together, like I couldn't see that the stressors in my life were causing this to happen to me. So I started freaking out. I'm not gonna lie. Like I told my mom, I told my husband, I was like crying. I did like really reach out for help, and I think my mom has a little bit experience with these kinds of things, like she knows a little bit about it, and so I could kind of confide in her. Like she kind of helped me, like tell me like, hey, this is what's happening. You're having panic attacks. Like nothing is wrong with you. But like I think you also notice, Sean, like when you're in that state, like you do not believe that like it's happening to you, and and it feels so strong and feels like so real that you really think like, okay, I'm gonna lose my mind, or whatever that might mean, I'm gonna like not exist, or I'm not gonna like get better, so even though I did find some comfort in my family, I also struggled to believe that I could get better, or that what my family is saying to me like is does apply to me, yeah.
Yeah. How did you describe it to your family?
um it's kind of hard, like it's kind of hard to remember, honestly. Like I just shared with my family like, hey, like I I think they could also see it in me. Like I was very distressed. I was very like on the edge, and I just couldn't like I just wasn't myself, I just told them like, hey, I'm feeling this way, I'm feeling that way. And since I had a strong belief like something's so wrong with me, like I'll just wake up sometimes from in like my sleep, and I'll just say, oh my gosh, I'm thinking I'm having like a psychotic episode or something, like I voiced my concerns like this, like I knew it wasn't true, but like I also feared that it might be true. So that's how I voiced it, like I just said what I'm fearing, you know yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, can you've mentioned a few of them, Natalia, but can you go through in some more detail the symptoms you were experiencing in this time?
Yeah, sure. So for me, like the fear of schizophrenia was a really big one. As I said, like I really did fear like I have a psychotic um illness. And also like adding to that, I think it kind of correlates with each other. Like I was also very scared of like philosophical things, or like existential things, I would say. And I think it's because like what I've read about schizophrenia, like you kind of have like these weird beliefs, for example, and like a thought in that time for me would be, for example, like, oh, what if I start believing that I don't know, the earth is like fake or something, like that's just like an example of a thing that I might like think in that time. And then I got scared because like, oh, that's something a schizophrenic would think, for example, But yeah, that was like some of my symptoms, and also the physical anxiety. Like I was really like having my heart palpitations, my heart was beating super fast. Um I was I was having mainly derealization. Like I didn't really have the depersonalization, but I really just saw like my outer world as like really weird, like everything was so foggy, like my eyes, like it just felt like I had something wrong with my vision. Um yeah, and it just all like had this like it just all came together to one big thing, because like if you see your outer world as weird, like of course you're gonna have like weird thoughts about it, Yeah.
Yeah, certainly, certainly. Yeah, the fear of psychosis and schizophrenia is such a common worry, and it was a major thing for me as well. And you're, yeah, you're right. it's when we don't know about these conditions that they feel the most frightening. Same with DPDR. But what I always say is that, like, when I recovered and I looked back on my experience, and I knew that the symptoms that I was experiencing were not the symptoms of psychosis or schizophrenia, and also like I had gone to a lot of different doctors and therapists who were all trained to look out for the symptoms of psychosis and schizophrenia. And not only did they not mention it, but I mentioned it, and they were just like, oh no, this isn't that. Like,
Yeah.
But the thing is that anxiety isn't really interested in evidence. It
Mhm.
doesn't really care that there's no evidence that you're not actually going through this. It just says, oh yeah, but what if as you said, it's anxiety says, yeah, but a sane person wouldn't have this thought.
Mm.
But the thing is that they do. They have them all the time. They're called intrusive thoughts. Like, that's
Yeah.
they're intrusive, big, frightening thoughts that appear to make no sense, and that's why they're frightening. Is because you don't need to be having this. Like, you're trying to watch a movie, but you're having a thought about, like, but what if the world isn't real?
Mm.
Um, that's why it's frightening. The fact that it makes no sense, the fact that it's not relevant to you, that's why it's frightening. Not because you're actually kind of believing it or getting
Yeah.
into some kind of a rational conversation with it.
Mhm.
It's frightening because you know that it doesn't make sense. That's the nature of intrusive thinking. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. So Natalia, at what point did you find out that it was called depersonalization?
Honestly, I was already familiar with that word, like I already knew what it was before that even happened. I think it was in the context of like marijuana usage, like whenever I would smoke, that was super long ago, I did not really have like the best experience. Like I also had like sort of like panic attacks maybe, or like I didn't feel good, but it just went away after like my high like ended. But that's why I also stopped at the end of the day. Um, yeah, like I already knew about it, but I think like when it occurred this time, I learned about it quickly as well. Like I also started researching about it like super um like very or I started researching about it um like right after it happened, like found your videos, of course, and like I think you had like videos like, oh, 5 signs you're gonna get better, or like 5 signs like you're experiencing DPDR or something like that. And that's when I knew about it. But like as you said, like when you're in that state of mind, like you kind of don't wanna like accept the good things, like of course DPDR isn't anything good, but it's like something you could get out of, rather than like your mind thinking you have schizophrenia, for example, so I knew it, but also like one part of my mind was like, oh, but what if you actually do have schizophrenia and you're like the different one, or the odd one out, so yeah, that was how it was.
Yeah, certainly. And were you in this time, Natalia, were you speaking to doctors, the therapists?
So yeah, I was actually speaking to a psychiatrist. um I I was speaking to her first, and she kind of like um she didn't really, I think she understood what the derealization is, but she kind of told me like, oh, that only happens when you have like a really traumatic experience and you want to like distance yourself from it, like she didn't really I believe she didn't really understand like the way I was having it, like the way like it was 24/7, like chronic depersonalization and derealization. So yeah, I was speaking to like a psychiatrist at that point, and she has diagnosed me with a bunch of things, but um like looking at it from nowadays, like I know that that was kind of like just like not very informed, a very informed person about this. Not that she was a bad psychiatrist, but she just wasn't informed about what I was going through personally. Yeah.
Okay. And you mentioned that you had to stop work at some point. Natalia. Can you tell me how did that happen? What led up to it?
So yeah, that was around December, so that was like already like quite a while into the DPDR episode. And like my work requires like a lot of contact with other people. So you always have to be like talking to people, you always have to make people feel good. I'm a cosmetologist, so of course like I work with a lot of women that want to be beautified and want to feel nice. And I understand that, like I want to give them the best experience that I can. And I just didn't feel like I could do that in this state. I was so frightened that I just I just couldn't do my job good, like I was just not unable to do it, so I did take like almost the whole month of December off, just to like, you know, um have a little break from that. And also at that time I was not sleeping at all. Like I was struggling with insomnia a lot, like because of the intrusive thoughts I was having. Like I was just very scared and like I had times where I didn't sleep for like 3 days and I just couldn't sleep, I was so frightened and I was trying to sleep so hard, but I just couldn't. And yeah, that was I would say like the worst time of my DPDR, like the December months, like sadly also the Christmas time. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When you have to stop working, or if you have to stop working, which I did too,
Mm-hmm.
um, it really feels like you are now debilitated, or this was because at the start it's like, okay, this is really terrifying, but it'll probably be gone in a day or two. Like it probably will be. And then a day or two turns into a week, that turns into 2 weeks, that turns into a month.
Yeah.
And then you're like, okay, this is not going away. And I was I was a musician, so
Mm-hmm.
I was interacting with people all the time.
Yeah.
And I had to be, it's not like you can show up to a gig in a bar and be sad. Like, you have to be interacting, you have to be fun and chatty, like, and I
Mhm.
couldn't do any of that. I couldn't do any of it. Um,
Yeah. And
and
also
yeah,
one
go
thing,
ahead.
like maybe you can also relate to that. Like I also had the feeling that like I was so scared that people might notice. Like when I did go to work, and I had the feeling of DPDR, like I always thought like, oh my gosh, like what if these people are gonna think like I'm crazy? What if these people notice that I'm not feeling well? Like that was so bad for me. Like I always had these thoughts and I couldn't really concentrate on the conversations I was having, which like normally I love talking to my clients, like it's fun.
Yeah, the fear of people noticing that there's something wrong with you is so common with not just DPDR but all anxiety based conditions. Um, I remember I remember like going out to things with my friends, and just all I could think to myself was, I am I'm ruining everybody's night.
Yeah.
Like I'm so anxious.
Mhm.
I can't enjoy anything. Whenever anybody talks to me, I get so self conscious that I can't focus on what they're saying. And I was convinced that everyone was like, you know, looking at me and worried about me.
Absolutely.
Um, and then when I recovered, I would look back at some of those times and talk about some of those times with my friends. And for the most part, like, I mean, not that they didn't know that something was going on. I mean, I said to them, okay, like I'm feeling anxious,
Mhm.
but I mean, ruining people's nights, sure, people hardly noticed that, like, that anything was wrong. They just thought I was
Yeah.
there enjoying the gig, like, which is actually a positive thing because it shows you the distance between how bad you think it is from
Mhm.
your internal experience and what other people perceive it to be, which is that, like, you seem to be kind of okay. I mean, a lot of the time I do coaching sessions with people with DPTR on Zoom all the time.
Mhm.
And something I say to them is like, if we were speaking in any other context, if we were chatting in a cafe or a bar,
Mhm.
most of the time, for the vast majority of these people, you wouldn't even notice. You wouldn't think that they had anxiety.
Yeah.
You know, they're speaking calmly, they're speaking clearly, they're explaining in detail what's happening.
Mhm.
But this idea that like when you feel, and I remember walking down the street, Natalia, and like seeing my reflection in a shop window, and I was shocked at how normal I looked. You
Yeah.
know,
Yep.
because in my head I'm spinning out of control, and you just see yourself, and you're just like, okay, I mean, I don't look like I'm any
Mhm.
different, you know, but that's how it is. It's all in catastrophizing about everything.
Yeah, I also feel like the whole like asking people to see if you act normal, like that's like I learned that now from therapy. Like it's like a part of like reassurance seeking. And it's sort of like I'm not saying this is OCD, but like it sort of goes into the OCD like realm of things, I would say. Like whenever you have an intrusive thought and you want to like see, okay, is this intrusive thought real? And you seek validation for it and you just want to like know that this is not the case. And maybe like for a second, you might feel a little relief, like, oh my gosh, my mom doesn't think I'm crazy, you know? And maybe it makes you feel really good in that moment. But like after a while, like you think, oh, what if my dad thinks I'm crazy, you know? Or what if my mom is crazy? Like something like this, like your mind really just plays tricks on you, like in this time of your life. And yeah, I think a part of recovery is also like knowing that you shouldn't like seek validation all the time for this, even if it feels terrible in the moment and you really want to do it so bad. Like I think trusting yourself like is really crucial.
Certainly. And what you've just described, Natalia, is such a good example of the habit of seeking reassurance and validation
Mhm.
that we get into with anxiety, which is like, you know, like saying to your mom, okay, do I do I seem like I'm a bit crazy or something? And the
Yeah.
mom goes, oh, absolutely not. Like, and I had those conversations with my family as well. Like, you know, just like, do I seem okay? Like, and for the most part, they'd be like, okay, we were, you know, you've lost a bit of weight, but you seem,
Yeah.
but you know, you're not a different person, right? And you would get, and the thing is, you get a moment of validation from it. You get a moment of relief. But what's happened in the long term is that you have taken time out of your day to acknowledge the anxiety. The anxiety in DP is so important that it requires you stopping a conversation with your mother and bringing this up and then, you know, seeking an answer for it. And it's the same thing with research. It's
Mhm.
the same thing. So you have a question. I'd have something like, okay, I'd be experiencing maybe two symptoms that I hadn't experienced at exactly the same time before, and that would freak me out. So my response would be to go onto the internet, go onto the forums, or there was just one forum at the time. This is 2005, and I would obsessively try to find somebody who had those particular symptoms,
Yeah.
right? And when I found that, and I'd be online for 45 minutes trying to going through every post possible, and and if I found that post, I would get a wash of relief over me, like, oh my God, like, thank God, okay, somebody else had this. That means I'm not the only one. That means I'm okay, right?
Yeah.
Um, the problem is though, is that like you've just spent 45 minutes out of your day researching anxiety and DP. And then I was
Yeah.
wondering why later that evening I was still thinking about it or I couldn't sleep because I was thinking about it. It's
Mhm.
because I had spent 45 minutes out of my day researching anxiety and DP online with the best of intentions. I don't blame myself for that. Like, but
Yeah.
we make the decisions we make with the information that we have. But part of recovery is understanding that the more that you validate and give time to those questions, the more that validates and gives time to anxiety. And
Yeah.
you have to stop doing that to recover because this is essentially a habit of thought. You have to take yourself out of that habit of acknowledging, or not acknowledging, but actively giving time and space to these thoughts and feelings.
Mhm. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so you mentioned Christmas as well, Natalia. So I don't know if this was your experience, but it certainly was for me, and it certainly has been for a lot of people I've spoken to. But Christmas felt very difficult. Christmas for me felt like those milestones
Mm.
feels so much more difficult because for me it was like, well, I got the condition in August,
Mhm.
and if you had said to me in August you'll still have this by Christmas, like I don't know what I would have done. Like I was,
Mm.
but then you get to Christmas and you're like, and you can't enjoy it, and it feels very difficult. But I'm just wondering about your experience with that.
Same thing, same thing right here. I was not enjoying myself at all. Like, of course, we had family over and I was trying to be normal so hard. Like I was, as I said, like I was so scared that I might look weird on the outside, but um yeah, it was not the case, of course, but like I was trying to be normal so hard and I was trying to engage so hard. I would say like around Christmas I was starting to like get a hang of it a little bit. Like it was still very hard and I was like in the beginning of my recovery stage, but I was trying to like engage with my family and stuff, which was not easy at all. Like I as I said, like I think December was the worst time for me. And even though I think I was doing pretty good in terms of like not isolating myself, it was a very hard time. I think like all the emotions and you feel like you need to feel happy because everybody around you is so happy, like I feel like this pressure also kind of does something to you, like I'm not supposed to feel this way right now. Why am I feeling this way? Like everything is okay, but I don't feel okay. You know what I mean? Like I felt like this certainly, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's a it can be a particularly difficult time in the recovery, or time when you're going through any anxiety based condition.
Yeah.
Um, you may have answered this already, Natalia, but it's just a question I like to ask everyone. What was your lowest point in the whole experience? Is there a particular time or incident that sticks with you?
Yeah, so I think like my lowest point was like I would tell my husband to just take me to the hospital like a couple times like during this whole time, and because I felt like I just needed to be somewhere where somebody could treat me, but um yeah, like my husband would always like tell me like, "Hey, this is what's happening, like nothing is wrong with you, like you need to calm down." But in my mind, like I was like, no, I need to go to the hospital right now. Like somebody needs to do something, like I was so convinced that I was something's happening to me and that I was like, yeah, really bad. And also like I feel like the insomnia really was really bad to me because usually I have no problems with sleeping at all. But like not sleeping for 3 days was terrible. I think it just makes you even more anxious, like you don't have like your rhythm intact and like you don't really like live the way you normally live. And yeah, like for my insomnia, I actually did go to like a hospital as well because I just couldn't take it anymore. And I spoke to like a psychiatrist and he like gave me some reassurance, of course. And I also at that time I took one like sleeping pill, I would say, and then after that, it kind of went uphill. Like I kind of got my rhythm intact, but I would say the insomnia was also pretty bad for me.
Yeah.
Oh, and also I think like not being able to focus on anything, like except the DPDR. Like for me, like one thing that really like was bothering me so much that even when I tried to kind of wean off of it a little bit, like even when I try to do something else, like let's just say I was watching Love is Blind on the TV, and I was trying to just like chill and like just eat my snacks and like watch like trash TV, but like my mind was like, oh, this is filmed like this because of this and this. And I just couldn't stop analyzing everything and like looking at it from like a really like complex perspective, if you know what I mean. Like I was just trying to like make a big deal out of everything. And my mind just couldn't rest and like just like watch TV, Like it was super bad. Yeah.
It's a very common experience with all anxiety based conditions to experience disrupted sleep.
Hmm.
It's extremely common. Um, I certainly experienced it. I also experienced like very, very intense nightmares. I would have nightmares of which I was having a panic attack or DP, and I would wake up into panic attacks and DP, which was terrifying. Um, and then especially with insomnia as well, you start focusing on it and obsessing about it.
Yes.
And the more that you kind of like desperately want to fall asleep, the
Hmm.
more difficult it is to fall asleep, you know?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Again, I had something similar with not being able to eat. You know, my appetite just like disappeared for
Same. Yeah.
yeah for 2 weeks. Like initially, it was, I mean, to the point where I had to get like protein shakes just to,
Hmm.
I had to put something into my body because I was like, I would look at a plate of food. I love my food. Like I would look at a plate of food and just be like, I don't know what to do with this. It looked like pixels. It just looked like
Yeah.
there was something wrong, like, you know. Um so, you know, one of the most frustrating aspects of anxiety is that we experience the symptoms of anxiety through the filter of anxiety. So when you look back on that experience, like what we're describing, Natalia, is like disrupted sleep uh, um, and reduced appetite.
Yeah.
Um, Classic symptoms of anxiety, like
Absolutely. Yes.
classic, like in the top five physical symptoms of anxiety: disrupted sleep and reduced appetite. 100%, right? It makes sense. It's not pleasant, but it makes sense. But when you're going through it
Hmm.
and you don't know why it's happening, then then you start, of course, to jump to these massive catastrophic conclusions about it.
Yeah.
And for me, it was like I thought I developed some sort of like I thought I had a disease that was going to stop me from eating, and I was just going to waste
Hmm.
away, you
Yeah.
know.
Hmm.
But that made as much sense to me as anything else because nothing made sense because there was no explanation for what I was experiencing. And like, you know, if you're going through life, I was in my early 20s as well, like, and you're going through life, things are good, you're getting your career started, and then the following week you can't sleep anymore and you can't eat anymore. And it's terrifying because you don't have an explanation for why it's happening, and you research about it obsessively.
Yeah. And but like, and at the end of the day, like one thing that I have also learned through therapy is that like I also didn't think I had any reason to be anxious at all. So that's why I was feeling so foreign, like I was feeling like, oh my God, like I don't know why this is happening. My life is going so good because like really like I do still believe my life is like a blessing, like I still feel very, very blessed. But like my therapist really like showed me like, hey, there is so many things like you could have been stressed for, like I was going I was at the end of my school. I had my exams in front of me, and it might be something completely different for everybody that's struggling with it, like everybody has some sort of stressors in their life, and like they might not seem to be like that big for you, because I would say I'm a very resilient person when it comes to stress. Like I could always like kind of handle it, but you could kind of see it like a glass, like the glass of stress fills up, fills up, fills up, and then at one point it's all the way in the top, and then it just flows out, and that's the panic attack, and that's the DPDR that's going to happen, and you don't know when that's going to happen. You don't know when the glass is going to be full with that anxiety. So um like the smallest thing can just like tip it off and just like start it off, even though it doesn't seem like very important.
Yeah. It's not a bear chasing you, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
There's nothing physically in your environment that is attacking you or hurting you, and yet your body and brain are reacting you're as if there's a car driving towards you. You're like,
Absolutely.
why is this happening?
Yeah. And
Um,
like one thing I would just want to say is like you might watch this video right now and think like, oh, but this is like I don't have anything to be stressed about, and like my life like is like this and this, and like I understand, I also felt this way, but trust me, there's always like I would say 90% or 99% of the time, or maybe even 100% of the time, um like there is something you could be stressed about and you're not even realizing it, and like that is setting off your anxiety, like it doesn't have to be like things in your life happening. It could be like your diet, it could be like I don't know, like you don't have to have it like in the top of your on the top of your mind, or on the tip of your tongue to for something to stress you out, like sometimes it's very hidden and sometimes you don't see it right away, but trust me, there is a reason why you feel anxious, and it's nothing else than that, like it's just anxiousness or stress.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, as we said earlier, like the scariest thing about a panic attack is that it seems to be happening for no reason.
Yeah.
Um, and also when people have their first experience with panic, and there's no frame of reference for it, that's when it can be particularly um particularly acute,
Yeah.
because you can't compare it to anything, and you think I'm going crazy, or I'm dying.
Yeah.
Um, and one of the beautiful aspects of recovery is that you have that familiarity with panic and anxiety, and familiarity with DP and DR. Um, most people will experience feelings of DPDR at some point in their lives. It is a perfectly human, natural, normal thing to experience
Absolutely,
moments
yes.
of DPDR, even moments of high stress and high anxiety. But the reason it turned into a problem in the first place was because of primarily a lack of understanding of what it was.
Mhm.
Because when you don't know that, like, part of your body's anxious response is to make you feel temporarily disconnected from the world around you, if you don't know that, then what conclusion are you going to jump to? I must be going crazy. I'm high and I can't come down. I'm in a dream and I cannot wake up, right?
Yeah.
Because those explanations feel like they make as much sense as anything else. Because if you don't know that and someone says to you, "Oh, that's anxiety," my reaction was like, "This isn't anxiety. Anxiety doesn't make me feel like I'm in a dream. Like, what are you talking about? Like, anxiety makes me sweat. Like, it makes my muscles tense up. Like, but like, this is different. This is different." No, it's not. It's not different. But once you understand it and know it, you, again, one of the beautiful parts of recovery is that the understanding of it prevents it from ever becoming a problem again, because again, the reason it turned to an issue in the first place was because of a lack of understanding of what it is. So when you understand it and recognize it, if you ever do feel anxiety in the future, if you ever have a brief moment of DPDR, you recognize it and you go, I know what this is. Okay, I'm going to reduce my decaf, or to go to switch to decaf, reduce my work hours, have a good sleep tonight. And just thinking about it in that sense, that allows the things to fade away, just like it allows your muscles to relax and your heart rate to get back to normal. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I also like think that's like the key, or well, maybe not the key, but a part of like recovery, to like really think about, okay, what might be the reason for my stress right now, like am I working too much? Am I worried about certain things too much? Or even like past trauma, or even like whatever it might be, like there's we're humans. It's a very like fast-paced world, and there's so many things to get stressed about, and really looking deeper into that. Like I think that's also something that can really help with recovery, and that's why I encourage everybody to like speak out about like their issues, because like if you bottle it up like in yourself, like, and you never talk about it to anybody else, um like it could be difficult to go through it alone, like sometimes talking to somebody and like kind of asking like, hey, um like talking about it and like voicing yourself, like that really is beneficial sometimes, not too much, like don't seek validation, like ask me everybody, oh, am I crazy, but like maybe like somebody you really trust, you can talk to them about it.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. So speaking of recovery, Natalia, how did your recovery start?
Yeah, so I think I would say like the active part of recovery really started for me like January this year. I think after Christmas and stuff, I think it's also important to say I did start to take SSRIs like in the middle of December because I got prescribed them around beginning of December, but I decided to take them. Yeah, I wanted to try it without first, but I decided to take them to kind of help me with the anxiety. Um, and I'm gonna say like after 2 or 3 weeks, I did start to feel less anxiety, and I am unsure if it was really the SSRIs that helped me or if it was the faith in the SSRIs that helped me, because I feel like if you believe that something will work for you, it's also a big factor, because if you go into a thing already thinking like, oh, that's not gonna help me anyways, like that's also gonna like I think the mentality is also a little bit important, but whatever might have been, like I think the SSRIs really helped me to like kind of take off the edge of the anxiety. I would say, it was still there, but um I think that's one thing that really helped and that's kind of started it. But I also think like after reading your book during my worst, I also didn't apply the tips for a very long time. Like I was still very much into the like researching and like, like doing all sorts of things that I shouldn't be doing. And then one day I just really like took like all my strength and just said, okay, you know what? I'm gonna put away all the books I've bought about anxiety. I'm gonna delete everything from my phone that has to do with it. And I just stopped looking at it. Like I absolutely just stopped. Even though it's very hard for me to like focus on something else because as I said, like my mind was racing and I still didn't feel good. I didn't feel recovered at all. I was trying, like I was really trying not to do things that you told me not to do. And hey, like little by little I was feeling better like each and every day. And then I had like times where I felt like, oh my gosh, like this is gone. And then it came back a little bit, but then like the times in between got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then yeah, and then it just stopped altogether. And yeah, that was my experience with kind of leaning into recovery.
Mm, okay. Um, that's that's great that you found that the SSRIs were helpful. I think that uh, you really hit the nail on the head, Natalia, when you said they they took the edge off the anxiety. That was my experience too when I went on them because I went on them for a couple of months at one point, and I did find them beneficial as well. Um, you know, they're selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so they increase the levels of serotonin in your brain, which can help to reduce the symptoms of anxiety and depression.
Mhm.
Um, the mistake that people make, and the mistake that I made to a certain extent as well, was thinking like, well, let's see if the SSRIs fix this immediately, or
Mhm.
fix, or I'll wait for the medication to fix me,
Yeah.
and all the but like no medication can like change a habit of thought.
Mhm.
So you still have to do that work, and then that was the mistake that I made. Was when I came off the SSRIs, I hadn't done any of the. I was still kind of like focusing on the condition, still researching it. So even though the the symptoms had been mitigated, I still hadn't kind of like gotten out of the habit of focusing on the anxiety and DPDR. But SSRIs can be a very useful tool. The way I always like to think about it is like, so with anxiety and DPDR, you will recover from this. Okay, it's a temporary condition. It's harmless. It's not pleasant, but it's temporary and harmless, and you will recover. As part of recovery, you have a toolkit of tools available to you.
Yeah.
There's a whole bunch of different techniques that you can use that are based on, and the stuff in my book is essentially based on cognitive behavioral therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, and they
Mhm.
work. They work because they reverse the process that causes it to happen in the first place. One of the tools that you have available to you in your toolkit is medication. And if you decide to use medication and it
Mhm.
works for you, fantastic. That's great. But just make sure to use it, like obviously under the instruction of your doctor, and but use it in conjunction with the other tools you have available to you. You
Yeah.
use the whole toolkit, right? Because the mistake that I made was I started taking the medication, and I just like pushed all the other tools away and said, right, let's see if this fixes me in a month's time, and
Yeah.
which just kind of leads to more frustration, But it sounds like you had a very good kind of healthy perspective on them and taking them.
Absolutely. Like in my experience, it definitely helped me. I'm gonna say I have family experience with these types of things, as I have mentioned. Like I had family members take antidepressants, and so I kind of, as I said, that gave me the faith that it might help me with that. But I also did keep in mind that this is not like an 100% cure for everything. I think you really have to be careful with that. But also, like in my experience, it did help me, I believe. I think sometimes SSRIs and other like psychiatric drugs are very demonized and seem as something bad. Um, but like in reality, you really have to think about it and really have to see like what's the best for you. And in my opinion, like you can like if you want to, you should try it and like see if it works for you or not. It's always like an option to get off of it, of course, with your psychiatrist and your doctor or whatever. Yeah, but in my experience, it helped me.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Mhm.
You mentioned as well about, having times where you felt like the condition was gone, and then a few days later it comes back.
Mhm.
This is such a common experience. It's basically part of recovery, is that we start to have, we start to have, hours and then days where, oh my God, it's under control. Or I got to the end of the day and I didn't think about anxiety, and then you
Yeah.
think, yes, it's gone, thank God.
Mhm.
And then 3 days later, the anxiety just ramps back up, and your first response is, oh, it's back and it didn't work, and I'm back to square one. um which, again, if you don't understand it, and I didn't understand it at the time, but when I was going through that, it was just this awful roller coaster of joy and then disappointment.
Mhm.
But what I realized, and especially looking back on it, was that, like, that's exactly what happens in recovery from all anxiety based conditions. It's never like a smooth curve. It's
Absolutely.
just it's the waves that go up and down. Your anxiety levels go up and down, which is normal. And but what happens is that the size of those waves gets smaller over time.
Yeah.
But if you can anticipate, if you can expect that and understand it and say, okay, I'm going to have days where the anxiety's up and days when it's down, but I won't let that make a difference to my actions during the day. Is
100%. Yes.
Yeah, it feels like a much healthier way to approach it, and it's a lot more just kind of compassionate, because you stop you stop being brutally disappointed when the anxiety naturally pops up a little bit.
That's also something that's really important to me to tell everybody. Like, anxiety is absolutely normal. Like, there will be times where you'll feel anxious, and there will be times where you might feel DPR come back a little bit. Like, for example, for me, like last week I actually got married, so that was a big
Did
event.
you? Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations, Natalia.
Thank you so much. But like as you might know, like this is a big event, like this is something that really um stresses you out sometimes, even though it's very beautiful. And I did feel like my anxiety come back a little bit, and I'm not gonna lie, I also felt like a little the depersonalization coming back a little bit. But since I knew that this is just something that's in the moment and it's not something that's gonna be there forever, it went like away. It went away, of course, because I knew that this is like um just a temporary condition and temporary state. And I think once you realize that, that's gonna just keep happening. Like you're gonna maybe feel a little anxious, which is absolutely normal. We all do. And then you're gonna like remind yourself, like, hey, this is normal, and then it's gonna go away. Yeah.
Yeah, and also, like, it's your wedding or any big life event like that. Like,
Hmm.
it's normal to feel anxiety. Like, if you didn't feel some bit of anxiety, but I feel anxiety going to weddings. Like,
Yep.
if you don't feel some bit of
Yeah.
anxiety about a big life event like that, Do you know, I mean, it is perfectly normal. Um, but what a wonderful thing that you had, I guess even just like the timing of it in a sense is that you had gone through this and had enough of an understanding to it that by
Mhm.
the time your wedding rolled around, you had then those natural moments of anxiety, but that you just said, yeah, I know what this is.
Yeah.
It's okay that I'm feeling this, and it's part of the ups and downs of the day, and I can let it go. And also, I've got 100 things to do, so
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Like it's so important to remember that. And like also one thing that I wanted to say is like um even though I also stopped working for a month, I would also suggest or like encourage you guys to not like completely stop doing everything, because I know in this moment like you really just want to like isolate and not be with everybody, like everything's scary, but I think it's so crucial and important to also go out and do the things you would like to do, even though you feel lost, even though you feel like you have lost your sense of self, because that's definitely how I felt too. Like I didn't know what I want. I was just very lost in these moments. Like, I think, like, still holding on to the things you like to do and, like, remembering, like, hey, like, this was my goal. Maybe, like, before DPDR, maybe I should start working on it again. Like, that also really helps take off your mind off that. And, like, even though it feels forced in the moment, like, when you do something, like, it's gonna feel more natural and more natural each time you kind of decide to do an activity. So I really encourage everybody to not isolate yourself, like just try your hardest to do your normal day-to-day life.
Yeah, certainly. When we do the things that we normally do in the day, it demonstrates to your brain that anxiety doesn't need to be here. Um, your body and brain will get rid of anxiety once they understand that it's not relevant. It doesn't need to have this around. The only reason it's been sticking around is because we inadvertently get into the habit of practicing it every day. And even though there's no physical danger around, we start to get into patterns of avoidance. So we say, well, I can't drive my car. I can't go down to the shop. I can't meet my friends at the cinema. I can't do this and that, which all communicates to your brain that anxiety is so important and so valid that it gets to decide what you can do throughout your day.
Yeah.
And when you communicate that to your brain, then your brain says, well, that must be really important. So we'll keep it around tomorrow and we'll keep it around next week. But when you push through these things and you don't, it's not to say that turns off the anxiety in the moment, but when you push through them, that demonstrates to your brain that, like, okay, so I went to the cinema, I felt a bit anxious, I felt a bit panicky even, I felt some DPDR, but I went and
Mm.
I the film was actually not bad. I had a good time with my friends, and I came home, and nothing bad happened.
Yeah.
And that demonstrates to your brain that, okay, so that half hour of anxiety that you felt before going to the cinema, pointless.
Yeah.
It didn't need to be there. So the next time you go to the cinema, your brain just turns down the volume a little bit, and then the next time you go, it turns it down. And then 4 or 5 times down the road, you watch the movie and you go like, what was I worried about the cinema for?
Yeah.
But if you avoid it, that strengthens the pattern of avoidance. But going through it, and as you said, Natalia, doing the things that you like to do demonstrates to your brain that it does not need to have anxiety around anymore.
Yeah.
Where did you get married, by the way? Was it in Germany or back in Poland?
We actually got married in Copenhagen. So, I think I mentioned it in one of the emails.
You did.
That
You mentioned Copenhagen, but I didn't know you were getting
yeah.
married.
Yeah, it's like I'm in a kind of international relationship. Like I'm Polish, he's from the USA, and it was kind of easier for us to get married in Copenhagen. Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah,
that's an interesting choice.
definitely.
Yeah, yeah. I've never been to Copenhagen, but I hear it's absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, it was my first time actually. It was really nice. It was I don't know if you ever been to Amsterdam, maybe.
Yes.
Yeah, so I would say it's sort of like Amsterdam, but maybe a little bit more peaceful, if you know what I mean? Like it's yeah.
To be fair, anywhere is more peaceful than Amsterdam.
Maybe. Yeah, I would say like, but you could really compare it with the little water and canals and yeah,
Right.
I really enjoyed it. I can recommend.
Nice, nice. Yeah, yeah. I'll definitely go and check it out someday. Um, so, Natalia, how was the DP manual helpful in your recovery?
Um, I would say it was very helpful. It was like sort of like really like you I think you hit the word manual really good. Like I think it's like a, as you said, like a tool book, like a kind of like a guide to just go through your experience with DPDR as smoothly as possible. I think it's just like the most basic facts you need for recovery to happen. And I think like um I don't know how to say it. It's sort of like a instruction. Like it's like an instruction for how to get better. And I think maybe like when you buy it and you read it the first time, like in my experience, like it didn't click right away. Like I was like, oh, this didn't help me right now. Like it's just like with the SSRIs, like the SSRIs of course didn't help me like this, like you really have to work for it. Like, faith without works is sort of like not really gonna do anything to you, so I think once you really start applying the things that Sean has written in the DP manual, like you will start getting better. Definitely, I can say it from my experience, it really did help me. And yeah, even if I was not reading it every day, like I really did remember the facts. And even if I was doing things from the DP manual, not consciously, like I was still doing them. Like they were still written in there, like there were still things that you have taught me like subconsciously. And I also think the audios you have like included in the package, like the I think it was the relaxation thing, like it really helped me in the times where I had the insomnia. Like I think that was something I would listen to during the time where I couldn't sleep, and like I was kind of like just having racing thoughts, and that really like also helped me calm down. And I think it was also good to hear these messages over and over again, Yeah.
That's great. I'm so happy it was helpful. Um, and uh, and yeah, I think it's good to think of recovery in terms of, one of the mistakes that we make is we want to find something that's going to switch off the anxiety.
Mm.
And I did this for a long time. I was like, I need to find, because the onset of the panic attack feels quite sudden. It feels like, for like in your case, you're walking down a path, there's just the trees, and then bang, something happens. And it feels, even though it may have been because of the accumulation of stresses, the onset of it felt like a switch was flicked.
Yeah.
So what we try to do is we try to find that switch and turn it off again. So I'll find something that turns that switch off immediately. But that's not going to work, because anxiety is essentially a spectrum. It's a habit of thought. It takes a bit of time and discipline to train yourself away from, but you can always do it, and it works every time. Yeah, it's a much more compassionate way to think of your recovery as like, you're finding something. I mean, with the DP manual, I've tried, to have it be, okay, here's a set of instructions and rules to follow, and when you do that, you will recover. Um, but you also don't be so hard on yourself in terms of like, well, if I wake up, I want to wake up tomorrow morning and all the symptoms to be gone. That's unfair on yourself.
Yeah.
It's like somebody who wants to quit smoking and saying, okay, I'm going to I want to wake up tomorrow morning and never want a cigarette again. It's like, that's okay. I mean, you can do it, but that's unfair to expect of yourself. Like, you need to give yourself the time and the space for the old habit to fade away, and you can do it.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's a spectrum. It changes over time. It goes up and down, but we reduce the size of those waves until it's gone
Yeah.
completely. um, So, a question that people always ask me, Natalia, now that you've recovered, is getting back to normal really getting back to normal?
Yes, guys, it is. This is no, like, I can assure you guys, you are not crazy. You are not like stuck in this forever. This is something that your anxiety does to your brain, and like in this moment it feels so like debilitating, and it just feels like so supernatural, I would even say. Like it feels like something really weird is happening to you, but it is not. As your anxiety, you'll learn how to deal with this. The only thing that's gonna change is that you're gonna be able to um view anxiety in a different way. Like you're gonna be able to work with anxiety instead of like being so fearful of it, you know? Yeah, so it goes back to normal. I feel I feel normal. I feel good.
That's great to hear. Um, so Natalia, there's going to be people watching this interview who may be going through something very, very similar to what you experienced, maybe DPDR triggered by a panic attack. And if you had advice for those people, um, what would it be?
You're gonna go through, like, you're gonna get through it. Your life will go on, and like there's always some kind of like help you can take, you know, like you can always like, you know what I mean? Like there's it's not the end of the world. That's what I'm trying to say. Like I think educating yourself really about these things you're scared of really helps you kind of take off the um misconceptions that you might have about these things. The same thing with like existential topics. Like I would say like nothing has changed in your world, you know, like just the like because we all had like existential thoughts even before DPDR and even before anxiety. And I think like since we are in this negative state of mind, we just like associate these things with negative things. You know what I mean? Like we might think like instead of thinking oh the world is beautiful even though it has no meaning, like we might think oh the world has no meaning and like everything is shit, for example, you know, like um I think educating yourself on that like really helps you like get through it and just don't lose any hope. Like just even though it feels unnatural to not Google or to like just let your anxiety happen in this moment, like just keep going on because as we said, this is something that you need to unlearn and it's gonna take a while until you feel like truly good. But once you feel truly good, like you know you can conquer everything else that comes afterwards.
That's great advice, Natalia. Thank you. Um, and just one more question. So, what's happening in the future for you? What's you're back into your work, back into your studies, or what's happening next?
Mhm. So as I said, I finished school recently, so I am currently working only 2 times a week. So I'm enjoying my time off on the days I'm not working, but I am trying to open up my own little salon in Germany, and I am working on that right now. I am thinking about going to university. I'm not sure though. Maybe that's gonna happen, maybe not. Like I'm still thinking about it, but yeah, life just goes on, you know, like with its ups and downs. And I'm grateful that I had this experience and I went through it because I feel like it made me stronger. It made me think about like my life a little bit more in depth and like also like kind of looking out for little stressors in my life that might make me feel unwell or anxious.
Yeah. Yep. So life is back to normal, and you're back to building your career and going to university if you want, living your dreams. That's so wonderful to hear, Natalia.
Thank you.
It's been so lovely to speak with you, Natalia. I really appreciate your time, and I know there's going to be people watching the interview who will find your story very informative and inspirational. So thank you so much for sharing your story with the channel, and it has been lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye.